The banquet hall fell silent the moment Nora raised her hands and answered the Queen Mother's mocking signs. No one moved, least of all the towering Alpha King beside her, because the language that flowed from Nora's fingers wasn't supposed to belong to any living wolf. And in that breathless pause, a truth began shifting beneath her life like a fault line preparing to break. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The crystal chandeliers hummed the same way they did every full moon, soft, melodic, and unimportant. Most gatherings that sound meant nothing except that another silver moon pack gala had begun, hungry for politics or hierarchy or blood. But tonight the sound seemed to resonate differently. A bit too sharp, a bit too cold, a bit too aware of itself. Nora Connor didn't look up at first. Her focus was on the goblet in her hand, a delicate silver thing that the head servant kept insisting she polish until it gleamed. She was polishing it not because it needed polishing, but because it gave her something to hold, something to do, something to fill the quiet. Quiet was where she lived most of her life. Then she heard it, a footfall that didn't match the others in the hall. Too measured, too deliberate, too commanding, like a predator or a king who had learned to be both. She looked up. A towering man stood at the grand entrance, framed by the silver glow of the moon outside. His presence was strikingly dominant, as if carved from ancient stone rather than flesh. His features were severe but regal, and his eyes held the amber glow of pure alpha blood. Behind him, moving with elegant precision despite her years, came a woman with silver hair swept into an immaculate coil. Grace, the Alpha King's mother. Nora's hands stilled on the goblet. She had heard whispers about the Queen Mother, about her deafness, about her sharp contempt for weakness, about the way she wielded silence like a weapon. The woman's gaze swept the room with imperial disdain, cataloguing every wolf, every servant, every detail with the ruthless efficiency of someone who had survived court politics for decades. The king, Cole they called him, though no one dared speak his name with familiarity, moved through the crowd like a storm front. Wolves parted instinctively, heads bowing, breaths held. Nora shrank back into her corner near the serving table, clutching her goblet like a shield. But Grace's eyes found her anyway. They always did. The ones at the bottom, the invisible ones, the omegas who thought they could hide in plain sight. The Queen Mother's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Her hands rose, fingers moving in sharp, deliberate gestures. The signs were clear, even to those who didn't know formal sign language. Small. Weak. Useless. The insult hung in the air like smoke. Several wolves glanced away, uncomfortable. Others smirked. Nora felt heat flood her face, that familiar burn of humiliation she'd carried her whole life. But something else stirred beneath the shame. Something old. Something that prickled at the base of her skull like a half-remembered dream. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind. When they mock you, child, show them what ancient blood remembers. Before she could stop herself, before she could think or retreat or disappear like she always did, Nora's hands moved. The signs that flowed from her fingers were savage, primal, impossibly old. They cut through the air like claws, each gesture heavy with power and authority that should never have belonged to a low-ranking Omega. The effect was instantaneous. Grace's face went white. Her hands froze mid-gesture. The smirk vanished. King Cole's head snapped toward Nora, his amber eyes blazing with something between shock and recognition. And the entire banquet hall, every alpha, every beta, every servant and noble, gasped in perfect horrified unison. Because what Nora had just signed wasn't merely a response. It was a command. In the forgotten language of the first alphas. The silence that followed felt alive, breathing, waiting. Nora's hands were still raised, fingers trembling now that the instinct had passed and awareness came flooding back. What had she done? The ancient signs hung in the air between her and the Queen Mother like a challenge thrown at the feet of royalty, and every wolf in the hall seemed frozen in the moment between disbelief and something that looked dangerously like fear. Grace recovered first, as queens always do. The shock drained from her face, replaced by something colder, sharper, more calculated. Her eyes narrowed to silver slits as she studied Nora with the intensity of a hunter sizing up prey that had suddenly shown fangs. The Queen Mother's hands moved again, but this time the gestures were different. Slower, more deliberate, edged with venom. Even without understanding the formal language, Nora could read the contempt radiating from every movement. Grace was asking a question, one that felt less like curiosity and more like an accusation. "Mother." Cole's voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. He hadn't moved from his position beside Grace, but something in his posture had shifted, coiled tighter, ready to strike or defend. Nora couldn't tell which. "Perhaps we should." Grace's hand slashed through the air in a gesture that needed no translation. Silence. The Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in 3 territories, obeyed his mother without hesitation. That alone told Nora everything she needed to know about the hierarchy in the royal family. Grace turned her attention back to Nora, and this time when her hands moved, they carved shapes in the air that felt deliberately cruel, mocking not just Nora's status but her very existence. The prickle at the base of Nora's skull intensified, spreading like frost across her thoughts. She knew what Grace was signing now, could read it as clearly as if the words had been spoken aloud, and the recognition terrified her because she had no memory of learning this language. The Queen Mother was calling her a pretender, a thief who had stolen something that didn't belong to creatures of her rank. Grace's fingers twisted into a final sign that Nora understood with crystalline clarity. "Where did you steal this?" Something in Nora's chest tightened. She wanted to look away, to drop her gaze like a proper Omega should, to melt back into the walls and disappear into the safety of being overlooked. But her eyes wouldn't obey. Instead, they locked with Grace's, and in that moment, Nora felt the prickle of recognition sharpen into something more specific, more unsettling. She knew this woman. Not personally, not from this life, but from somewhere deeper, somewhere that predated memory and lived in the marrow of bones and the whisper of inherited instinct. Grace felt it too. Nora could see the moment the Queen Mother recognized the connection, the way her expression shifted from contempt to confusion to something that looked almost like recognition. It lasted only a heartbeat before Grace's face hardened again, but it was enough. The Queen Mother's next signs were faster, more aggressive, demanding answers that Nora didn't know how to give. "Enough." This time Cole's voice carried the weight of command that couldn't be ignored, not even by his mother. He stepped forward, placing himself between Grace and Nora with a deliberateness that sent ripples of shock through the assembled wolves. An Alpha King didn't shield an Omega from his own mother. It simply wasn't done. "This is neither the time nor the place for interrogations." Grace's hands moved in sharp, angry gestures directed at her son. Cole watched her signs with a patience that seemed to cost him. His jaw tight, his amber eyes flickering between gold and something darker. When Grace finished, Cole shook his head once, a small but absolute negation. "No," he said quietly, and the word held more authority than any shout. "I will handle this." The Queen Mother's face flushed with fury, but she was queen enough to know when a battle was lost. With a final withering look at Nora, Grace turned on her heel and swept toward the high table, her posture radiating indignation. The crowd parted before her like water before a ship's prow, every wolf careful not to meet her eyes. Only then did Cole turn his full attention to Nora, and she immediately understood why entire packs bent the knee to this man. His presence was overwhelming up close, not just physical dominance but something older, something primal that called to the wolf in every creature near him. His scent hit her like a physical force, pine and snow and something that tasted of midnight hunts and ancient power. Nora's wolf, usually so quiet and small inside her, suddenly stirred with an awareness that made her breath catch. "Look at me," Cole said, and it wasn't a request. Nora obeyed, lifting her eyes to meet his, and immediately wished she hadn't. Up close, his face was even more striking, all sharp angles and ruthless beauty, the kind of face that belonged on marble statues of warrior kings. But it was his eyes that trapped her. Amber shot through with flecks of gold, intelligent and dangerous, and currently burning with questions that Nora couldn't answer even if she wanted to. "Who taught you that language?" His voice was low, meant only for her ears, but it carried the unmistakable weight of alpha command. The question pulled at something inside Nora, demanding truth, demanding submission, demanding answers she didn't have. "I don't." Her voice came out barely above a whisper, rough from disuse. She cleared her throat, tried again. "I don't know what you mean." One dark eyebrow rose in an expression of disbelief so profound it was almost insulting. "Don't lie to me, Omega. I can hear your heartbeat from here. It's racing like prey that knows it's been cornered." He leaned closer, and Nora fought the urge to step back, to run, to do anything except stand there drowning in his scent and his presence and the terrible certainty that her life had just irrevocably changed. That language died with the first alphas 3 centuries ago. No one speaks it anymore. No one even remembers it exists except in old texts that are kept locked in royal archives. "So I'll ask again, who taught you?" "My grandfather," Nora heard herself say, and even as the words left her mouth, she felt the wrongness of them, like trying to hold water in cupped hands. The memory was there but distant, veiled by fog she couldn't penetrate. "He used to when I was young," but the rest of the thought slipped away, sliding back into the murk of half-memories and dreams that felt more real than waking. Cole studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Your grandfather," he repeated, tasting the words like they might be lies. "And where is this grandfather now?" "Gone." The word came easier because it was true, even if everything around it felt uncertain. "Exiled." "I don't remember why." Something shifted in Cole's expression, too quick to read. He straightened, putting a careful distance between them, but his eyes never left her face. "You're coming with me after the banquet," he said, and it wasn't a suggestion. "We need to discuss exactly what you are, Nora Connor, and why my mother looked at you like she'd seen a ghost." Before Nora could respond, before she could protest or agree or do anything except stand there with her heart hammering against her ribs, Cole turned and strode toward the high table where Grace sat rigid with barely contained fury. The crowd swallowed him immediately, closing ranks, but Nora could feel eyes on her from every corner of the hall. Whispers started like wine through dry leaves, growing louder with each passing second. She looked down at her hands, at the fingers that had moved without conscious thought, forming shapes in an ancient language she shouldn't know. They looked the same as always, small, unremarkable, the hands of someone meant to serve and fade into shadows. But something had changed. Something fundamental had shifted in the moment those savage signs had flowed from her fingers, and Nora had the terrible certainty that she could never go back to being invisible again. The chandeliers hummed overhead, soft and melodic and utterly indifferent to the fault line that had just split Nora's world in two. If this story has held you this long, subscribing is how you help it continue. Thank you. Now back to the story. The banquet dragged on like a nightmare that refused to end. Nora moved through her duties in a daze, refilling goblets and clearing plates with hands that still trembled from what they'd done. Every wolf in the hall watched her now, their gazes sharp and assessing, stripping away the invisibility she'd worn like armor her entire life. Some looked curious, others suspicious, and a few, the older ones, the ones with silver threading through their hair, looked at her with something that resembled fear. Grace sat at the high table like a statue carved from ice and fury, her silver hair catching the candlelight in a way that made her seem otherworldly, untouchable. She hadn't signed another word since Cole's intervention, but Nora could feel the weight of the Queen Mother's attention tracking her movements across the hall. It was the gaze of a predator who had identified a threat and was calculating the most efficient way to eliminate it. Cole, by contrast, appeared utterly composed. He sat beside his mother with the casual authority of someone born to rule, engaging the assembled nobles in conversation that seemed effortless, normal, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. But Nora noticed the way his eyes found her every few minutes, amber flashing in the candlelight, reminding her that she hadn't been forgotten. That she was, in fact, the center of his attention despite all appearances to the contrary. When the last course was finally cleared and the nobles began their polite exodus, each one bowing deeply to the king before departing, Nora tried to slip away with the other servants. She made it as far as the servants' corridor before a hand closed around her wrist, not roughly but with unmistakable firmness. "Not you." Cole's voice came from directly behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I believe I was clear about our discussion." Nora turned slowly, finding herself trapped between the Alpha King and the stone wall of the corridor. This close, without the buffer of the crowd, his presence was even more overwhelming. He'd removed his formal jacket, and the white shirt beneath did nothing to disguise the predatory strength of his frame. Every instinct she possessed screamed at her to submit, to lower her eyes, to make herself smaller. Instead, she lifted her chin slightly, a gesture of defiance that surprised them both. "I have nothing to tell you that would be worth your time, Your Majesty." Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or approval. "Let me be the judge of that." He released her wrist and gestured toward a side door she hadn't noticed before. "This way. Unless you'd prefer to have this conversation in front of the remaining court." That got her moving. Nora followed him through the door and down a narrow hallway lined with portraits of wolves in various stages of transformation, their painted eyes seeming to follow her progress with the same unsettling awareness as the living wolves in the banquet hall. Cole walked with the confidence of someone who owned every stone in the castle, every breath of air, every moment of silence between them. He led her to a study that smelled of old leather and wood smoke. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, stuffed with volumes that looked ancient enough to crumble at a touch. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, its surface covered with maps and correspondence and what looked like military reports. Cole closed the door behind them with a decisive click, and suddenly the space felt much smaller, the air much thinner. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair positioned strategically in front of the desk, a chair meant for subordinates, for people receiving judgment or orders. Nora remained standing. "I'd rather not." Cole's eyebrow rose again in that expression of faint surprise. "You realize I could compel you with Alpha Command if I wished. Then why don't you?" The words were out before she could stop them, reckless and foolish, but some part of her needed to know if he would, if this man who had defended her against his own mother would resort to the kind of dominance that turned wolves into puppets. For a long moment, Cole simply studied her, his amber eyes unreadable in the firelight. Then, to her surprise, he moved to the second chair and sat down himself, gesturing again to the empty seat beside him rather than across from him. "Because I want answers, not obedience. There's a difference." Warily Nora sat. The leather was soft beneath her, worn smooth by decades of use. She perched on the edge, ready to flee if necessary, though where she would run to in the Alpha King's own castle she had no idea. Cole leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Tell me about your grandfather." "I barely remember him," Nora said, and it was true, wasn't it? The memories felt distant, vague, like trying to recall a dream upon waking. "He was exiled when I was young, maybe 7 or 8. I don't know why. But he taught you the first language before he left." Nora's hands clenched in her lap. "I don't remember him teaching me anything. I don't remember learning it at all. Tonight when Grace signed at me, I just responded. The movements came without thought, like breathing. Like instinct," Cole said quietly, and something in his tone made her look up. His expression had shifted, grown more serious, the casual mask slipping to reveal something calculating underneath. "Do you know what the first language is, Nora? Not just what it's called, but what it represents." She shook her head mutely. Cole rose and moved to one of the bookshelves, running his fingers along the spines until he found what he was looking for, a slim volume bound in what looked like aged hide. He returned and placed it on the small table between their chairs, opening it to a page marked with a strip of faded ribbon. The text was written in a script Nora couldn't read, flowing and strange, But the illustrations were clear enough. Wolves in various formations, their bodies positioned in ways that suggested both dance and battle, and among them, human figures with their hands raised in complex gestures. The first alphas didn't just rule through strength, Cole explained, his finger tracing one of the illustrations. They commanded through movement, through sacred signs that bypassed language and spoke directly to the wolf in every creature. These signs weren't requests or suggestions. They were compulsions written into the very instinct of the pack. When a first alpha signed, defend, wolves defended without question. When they signed hunt, the pack hunted as a single unified force. Nora stared at the images, her throat tight. But that was centuries ago. You said the language died with them. It was supposed to. Cole's voice had gone hard. The first alphas were overthrown precisely because their power was too absolute. The revolution that ended their reign made it forbidden to teach or use the first language. Any wolf found practicing it was executed, their entire bloodline eliminated to prevent the knowledge from passing down. Within 2 generations, the language was extinct. Or so we believed. Then how? Nora's voice cracked. She cleared her throat, tried again. How could I possibly know it? That's the question, isn't it? Cole closed the book with a soft thud. There are only 2 possibilities. Either someone with access to the royal archives taught you, which would require them to have somehow stolen texts that are kept under guard and multiple layers of protection. Or... He paused, his eyes finding hers with an intensity that made her want to look away. Or you're a direct descendant of the first alphas themselves, and the knowledge was passed to you through blood rather than teaching. The words hung in the air between them, impossible and terrifying. Nora's laugh came out sharp and bitter. That's ridiculous. I'm an omega. I'm nobody. My parents were nobody, my grandmother was nobody, we've always been. Nobody, Cole finished for her. Yes, I imagine that's exactly what your grandfather wanted everyone to believe. Nora's hands had started to shake again. She pressed them flat against her thighs, trying to still the trembling. Why would he do that? Why hide something like that? To keep you alive, Cole said simply. If what I suspect is true, if you carry the blood of the first alphas, then you're either the most valuable asset or the most dangerous threat in the kingdom, depending on who's looking at you. My mother's reaction tonight tells me she recognizes what you are, even if you don't. What am I? The question came out barely above a whisper. Cole stood and moved to the window, looking out over the moonlit grounds. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of history, of secrets that had been buried for good reason. The first alphas didn't pass their power through the conventional ways. It wasn't about strength or dominance. They passed it through blood, yes, but also through something they called imprinting. A way of writing knowledge directly into the body, into the instincts, so that certain movements and gestures would be remembered even when conscious memory failed. He turned back to face her, and in the moonlight his eyes seemed to glow. Your grandfather didn't teach you the first language, Nora. He imprinted it into you, probably when you were very young enough that your conscious mind wouldn't remember the process. He veiled your memories of him, of your heritage, of everything that might have made you a target. But he couldn't veil your instincts. When my mother challenged you, when she pushed you in front of the entire court, your body remembered what your mind had forgotten. Nora's breath came faster now, panic rising in her chest like floodwater. She tried to think back, to remember those early years before her grandfather's exile, but it was like trying to see through frosted glass. There were shapes, suggestions of memory, but nothing solid, nothing real. She remembered his face, weathered and kind, with eyes that held secret sadness. She remembered his hands, large and scarred, gentle when they touched her hair. But everything else was fog. How do I get them back? She asked, hating the desperation in her voice. The memories. If they're veiled, there must be a way to unveil them. Cole's expression grew troubled. Veiling is ancient magic, Nora. It's not just about hiding memories. It's about protecting them behind walls that only collapse when certain conditions are met. Usually death, either of the person who cast the veil or the person who carries it. Sometimes specific words or actions can trigger the unveiling, but you don't know what those triggers are, Nora finished. No. Only your grandfather would know that, and if he's truly in exile. Cole left the implication hanging. Silence fell between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to voice. Nora's mind raced through everything she thought she knew about herself, about her family, about the quiet invisible life she'd built from the scraps of being overlooked and dismissed. All of it felt suddenly hollow, a fiction constructed to hide a truth too dangerous to expose. What happens now? She asked finally. Cole returned to his chair, and when he looked at her, she saw the king rather than the man, calculating, strategic, already planning moves in a game she didn't yet understand. Now you stay close to me. Under my protection, officially employed in the royal household. My mother won't be satisfied with tonight's performance. She'll want to test you to confirm what she suspects. And if she confirms it... He paused, seeming to weigh how much truth to share. Grace was alive during the last years of the first Alpha's reign. She was just a child, but she remembers. She knows what happens when that kind of power rises again. You think she'll try to kill me? I think she'll try to control you, Cole corrected. Or failing that, yes, eliminate you before you become a threat to the current order. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, bringing them closer together in the intimate space. But I won't let that happen. You're too valuable to lose. And not just because of what you represent politically. Then why? Nora demanded, exhaustion making her bold. Why does an Omega nobody matter to the Alpha King? Cole's smile was slight, almost sad. Because the first language isn't just about commanding wolves, Nora. It's about communicating with them on a level that transcends words, about reaching the primal instinct that lives in all of us. If war comes, when war comes, because it's always coming, I'll need someone who can coordinate the pack without sound, who can give orders that bypass confusion and fear and conscious thought. His eyes held hers with absolute certainty. I'll need you. Not as an Omega. Not as nobility. As the bridge between what we are and what we were. Between the civilized wolves who bow and scrape and the savage creatures we become under the moon. The words settled over Nora like a mantle she hadn't asked for and didn't know how to wear. She thought of her grandfather, of the careful way he must have planned this, hiding her in plain sight for years, waiting for the moment when she would need the knowledge he'd buried in her bones. Had he known? Had he foreseen this exact moment, this exact conversation with a king who looked at her like she was a weapon waiting to be unsheathed? I don't want this, she whispered. I know, Cole said, and for the first time since they'd entered the study. His voice held genuine sympathy. But want has nothing to do with what we are, Nora. Only with what we choose to do about it. He stood and moved to the door, opening it to reveal a guard waiting in the corridor. Marcus will escort you to your new quarters in the royal wing. You'll find appropriate clothing and anything else you need. Tomorrow we begin training. You need to understand the full extent of what you can do before someone else discovers it first. Nora rose on unsteady legs, moving toward the door like a prisoner walking toward sentencing. She paused at the threshold, looking back at Cole silhouetted against the firelight. Your mother won't accept this. My mother doesn't have to accept it, Cole replied. She just has to obey. I'm the Alpha King, Nora, and you're under my protection now. That's not a request or a negotiation. That's law. As Marcus led her through the silent corridors toward a future she couldn't imagine and a past she couldn't remember, Nora felt the fog in her mind pressing closer, hiding secrets that suddenly felt vital, necessary like oxygen. Somewhere behind those veils her grandfather had built, there were answers. There was truth. There was the reason why a nobody Omega had been given the power to command wolves with nothing but the movement of her hands. And somewhere in the darkness of the castle, Grace was planning her next move, because queens didn't survive court politics for decades by accepting defeat gracefully. The chandeliers in the corridor hummed softly as Nora passed beneath them, their sound different now, changed, as if even they knew that the invisible girl was invisible no longer. Nora didn't sleep that night. How could she, when every time she closed her eyes she saw her hands forming shapes she didn't remember learning, speaking words that had no sound? The quarters Marcus had led her to were absurdly luxurious compared to the servants' dormitory she was accustomed to. A four-poster bed with silk sheets, a private bathing room with hot water that flowed from actual taps, windows that overlooked the moonlit gardens rather than the kitchen yard. It was the kind of room given to visiting nobles, to wolves of consequence, to people who mattered. Felt like a beautiful cage. She stood at the window as dawn began to paint the sky in shades of rose and gold, watching the castle grounds come alive with morning activity. Servants moved between buildings on their early errands, guards changed shifts at the gates, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the howl of wolves running the perimeter. Normal sounds, normal routines, everything continuing as if the world hadn't fundamentally shifted beneath her feet. A knock at the door made her jump. She turned, her heart hammering, half expecting to see Grace standing there with murder in her eyes, or perhaps soldiers sent to drag her to some dungeon for crimes she didn't understand. Instead, a young woman in a maid's uniform entered carrying a tray of breakfast and what looked like clothing draped over her arm. "His Majesty requests your presence in the training courtyard after you've eaten," the maid said, her eyes carefully averted in a show of respect that felt wrong directed at Nora. "He said to wear these." She laid out the clothing on the bed, practical trousers and a fitted tunic in deep forest green, well made but designed for movement rather than show. Boots followed, supple leather that looked like they'd actually fit. "Training." Nora's voice came out rough from disuse. The maid's lips twitched in what might have been sympathy. "I wouldn't keep the Alpha King waiting if I were you, miss. He's not known for his patience." After the maid left, Nora forced herself to eat, though the food tasted like ash in her mouth. The clothes fit perfectly, which meant someone had taken her measurements while she slept or, more disturbingly, had known her size before she'd even been brought to these quarters. The boots were comfortable, broken in just enough that they didn't pinch. She caught sight of herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back, no longer in the shapeless gray of servant's garb but dressed like someone who might actually matter, might actually have purpose beyond pouring wine and clearing plates. The training courtyard was in the eastern section of the castle, a wide expanse of packed earth surrounded by high stone walls. Weapon racks lined one side, filled with practice swords and staffs and various implements Nora couldn't name. A handful of guards were sparring in one corner, their movements precise and brutal, and they stopped to stare as she entered. She felt their eyes on her like physical weight, assessing, judging, wondering what an Omega was doing in the king's training ground. Cole stood at the far end of the courtyard, his back to her, speaking with a man in captain's insignia. He'd changed from last night's formal attire into training clothes similar to hers, though his were black and somehow made him look more dangerous rather than less. As if sensing her presence, he turned, dismissing the captain with a gesture. The man bowed and retreated, though not before shooting Nora a look of pure curiosity mixed with suspicion. "You're late," Cole said as she approached. Nora glanced at the sky, judging the sun's position. "You didn't give me a time. I told you we'd begin training today. For a wolf of your intelligence, I assumed today would mean as soon as possible, rather than whenever convenient." But there was no real heat in his words, more amusement than anger. He gestured for her to follow him to a cleared section of the courtyard, away from the guards and their curious stares. "What exactly are we training?" Nora asked, her stomach tight with nerves. "Awareness," Cole replied. He stopped in the center of the space and turned to face her fully. In the morning light, his features were even sharper, more defined, the amber of his eyes bright against his tanned skin. "You used the first language last night on pure instinct, without understanding what you were doing or why. That's dangerous, Nora. Power without control is just destruction waiting to happen. I didn't ask for this power." "No, you didn't. But you have it nonetheless, and ignorance won't protect you." He began to circle her slowly, and Nora fought the urge to turn with him, to keep him in her line of sight like prey tracking a predator. "Tell me what you remember about signing to my mother." Not what you felt but what you actually did. The specific movements. Nora closed her eyes, trying to recall those frantic seconds. My hands moved. The gestures felt sharp, aggressive, like I was cutting through something. Open your eyes, Cole commanded, and she obeyed. He'd stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his irises. Show me. Repeat the signs you made. I can't just. Try, he said, and though it wasn't quite alpha command, there was enough authority in the word that her hands began to move before conscious thought caught up. They rose, fingers forming shapes that felt both foreign and familiar, muscle memory written into flesh. But halfway through the sequence they faltered, stopped, the movements incomplete. Frustration burned through her. I told you I don't know what I'm doing. Because you're thinking, Cole said. The first language doesn't work through conscious thought. It works through instinct, through the part of you that exists beneath reason. He stepped closer, and suddenly his hand was on her wrist, his touch warm and firm. Stop trying to remember. Just feel. His thumb pressed against her pulse point, and Nora's breath caught. This close, his scent was overwhelming. Pine and snow and something wild that called to the wolf inside her. That small, quiet creature she'd spent years trying to suppress suddenly surged forward with an awareness that made her dizzy. Cole's eyes widened slightly, and she realized he felt it too, that sudden connection between their wolves, recognition sparking like flint on steel. Good, he murmured, his voice gone low and rough. That's what I need you to access. Not your human mind but your wolf. The instinct that lives deeper than thought. He released her wrist and stepped back, putting careful distance between them. Nora's hand tingled where he'd touched her, and she curled her fingers into a fist to stop the sensation. Why does it matter? So I spoke some ancient language. Done. Why not just let it be forgotten? Because it won't be forgotten, Cole said sharply. Word is already spreading through the pack about what happened last night. By noon, every wolf in the territory will know that an Omega spoke the forbidden tongue and made the Queen Mother go pale. Some will be curious. Some will be frightened. And some. His jaw tightened. Some will see you as either a weapon to be claimed or a threat to be eliminated. So what am I to you? The question burst out before she could stop it. A weapon. A threat. A convenient bridge to power you want to access. Cole's expression shifted, something almost like respect flickering across his features. You're a complication, he said honestly. You're a mystery that appeared in my court at the worst possible time, when tensions with the Shadowstalkers are already near breaking point and my council is divided on how to respond. You're a girl who shouldn't exist, speaking a language that should be dead, carrying knowledge that was supposed to die with the first alphas. He paused, his eyes holding hers with absolute focus. And you're absolutely essential to everything that comes next. I don't understand. Then let me be clear. Cole's voice dropped to the tone he'd used in the study last night, the one that carried the weight of truth too heavy to question. The Shadowstalkers aren't just another rival pack, Nora. They're descendants of the wolves who overthrew the first alphas, who built their entire culture on the belief that alpha power should be absolute and unchecked by ancient laws or sacred commands. If they learn that someone with the ability to speak the first language still exists, they'll do one of two things: try to capture you and force you to serve them, or kill you to ensure no one can ever challenge their philosophy of rule. Nora's throat went dry. And you want to use me against them? I want to give us a fighting chance, Cole corrected. The Shadowstalkers have been growing bolder over the past year. They've attacked 3 of our border settlements, killed 24 wolves, and stolen supplies that suggest they're preparing for something larger. My scouts report they're amassing forces in the Northern Territories, and their alpha, a bastard named Reardon, has been making alliances with packs that should know better than to trust him. His hands clenched at his sides, the only sign of tension in his otherwise controlled posture. War is coming, Nora. Not tomorrow, perhaps not even this season, but it's coming. And when it does, I need every advantage I can get. So I'm an advantage. The words tasted bitter. You're a bridge, Cole said, stepping close again. And this time there was urgency in his movement, in the way his hands came up as if to grip her shoulders before he caught himself. A bridge between what we are now, civilized wolves who've forgotten our primal nature, and what we were when the first alphas ruled. They commanded through instinct, through movements that spoke directly to the wolf without the interference of human doubt or fear. If you can relearn that language, truly understand it rather than just responding on instinct, you could coordinate an entire pack in battle without a single spoken word. You could give commands that bypass confusion, that reach the savage creature in every wolf and direct it with perfect precision. He was painting a picture Nora didn't want to see, showing her a future where her hands held the power of life and death, where movement she barely understood could send wolves into battle or hold them back from slaughter. I'm not a commander, she whispered. I'm not a warrior. I'm an Omega who's been trained her entire life to serve and submit and make herself small, Cole finished. Yes, I know. But that training was a disguise, Nora. A veil to hide what you really are. And like it or not, what you really are is exactly what this kingdom needs to survive what's coming. Silence fell between them, heavy with implications and possibilities Nora couldn't fully process. Around them, the training courtyard had gone quiet. The guards had stopped sparring to watch this exchange, though they were too far away to hear the actual words. She could feel their attention like pressure against her skin, all these warriors wondering what the Alpha King was saying to the strange Omega who'd shocked the court. What if I refuse? Nora asked quietly. Cole's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went cold. Then you condemn every wolf in this territory to fighting blind when the Shadowstalkers finally attack. You condemn my warriors to dying confused and scattered when they could have been coordinated and deadly. You condemn children and elders to being slaughtered because our pack couldn't respond fast enough or efficiently enough to protect them. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. And you condemn yourself to being hunted by both sides. By Grace, who sees you as a threat to the current order, and by Reardon, who'll hear about you soon enough and want to eliminate you before you become a problem. That's not fair, Nora breathed. No, Cole agreed. It's not. Nothing about this is fair, Nora. Not to you, not to me. Not to any wolf trying to survive in a world that's more brutal than we like to pretend. He straightened, putting distance between them again. And when he spoke next his voice had returned to the commanding tone of a king rather than the urgent plea of a man. I'm not asking you to want this. I'm not even asking you to like it. I'm demanding that you accept reality. You have power you didn't ask for, knowledge you don't remember learning, and a heritage that makes you either the most valuable or most dangerous wolf alive. What you do with that is your choice. But make no mistake. Choosing to ignore it to pretend it doesn't exist is still a choice. And it's one that will have consequences you'll have to live with. Nora's hands trembled at her sides. She looked down at them, these traitorous things that had spoken a dead language and changed her life irrevocably. They looked so ordinary, so harmless. But she remembered the way Grace's face had gone white, the way the entire pack had gasped in shock, the way power had flowed through her fingers like lightning through a conductor. Who taught me? She asked, looking up at Cole. You keep saying my grandfather, but you don't know that for certain. What if it wasn't him? What if someone else imprinted this knowledge? Someone who wants to use me for their own purposes. Then we find them, Cole said simply. And we discover what those purposes are before someone else does. He gestured to the cleared space around them. But first you need to understand what you can do. Not just reacting in defense or surprise, but deliberately, consciously accessing the first language. That starts now. Nora wanted to refuse, to walk away from this training ground and these demands and the future Cole was trying to forge for her. But even as the impulse rose, she knew it was futile. He was right. Ignoring her ability wouldn't make it disappear. It would just make her unprepared when someone inevitably tried to exploit it or eliminate it. What do I do? She asked, and if her voice shook slightly, at least it didn't break. Cole's expression softened just slightly, approval flickering across his features. For now, we start simple. I want you to call your wolf forward. Not to shift, just to bring her close enough to the surface that you can feel her fully. The first language works through that connection. Human mind and wolf instinct unified. My wolf is. Nora hesitated, shame coloring her cheeks. She's small. Weak. Not like yours. Size doesn't matter for what we're doing, Cole said. In fact, having a smaller, quieter wolf might be an advantage. The first alphas weren't all massive creatures. Some of the most powerful were slight, almost delicate. Power came from the connection, not the physical form. He settled into a ready stance, loose and balanced. Now stop thinking and start feeling. Close your eyes. Breathe. Find that part of yourself that exists beneath civilization. Nora closed her eyes, feeling foolish and exposed, standing in the middle of the training yard with guards watching and the Alpha King waiting for her to access something she barely understood. She breathed in slowly, out slowly, trying to calm her racing heart. Deeper. Past the fear and confusion and overwhelming sense of being in over her head. Down to where her wolf lived. That small creature she'd spent years trying to suppress because omegas who drew attention to their wolves faced consequences. But now someone was asking her to do exactly that. To let the wolf rise. To embrace rather than suppress. She felt it then, a stirring in her chest, a warmth that spread through her limbs. Her wolf, curious and cautious, responding to the call. Nora expected the usual wariness, the instinct to shrink back, to hide. But instead, her wolf pushed forward with surprising eagerness, as if she'd been waiting for this moment, for permission to finally be acknowledged. Good, Cole's voice came from somewhere close. Now keep her there. Stay in that space between human and wolf, where both exist simultaneously. Nora's hands began to tingle. She opened her eyes and looked down to see her fingers moving of their own accord, forming shapes that felt less foreign now, more natural. The signs came easier this time, flowing like water, and with them came understanding. Not complete, not perfect, but present. This gesture meant gather. That one meant protect. This complex series meant something like hold position until the moon rises. There, Cole breathed, and she looked up to find him watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. That's it. That's the connection. Do you feel it? Nora nodded, unable to speak because her throat had gone tight with emotions she couldn't name. Fear, yes, but also something stranger, recognition. As if her body was finally doing what it was meant to do, what it had been designed for all along. Now, Cole said softly, tell me who taught you this. Not with words. Show me with the signs. Let your hands speak the truth your mind has forgotten. And as the morning sun climbed higher and the training ground fell into breathless silence, Nora let her wolf guide her fingers through shapes that told a story she didn't consciously remember but her body knew by heart. The signs came faster now, flowing from Nora's hands like water breaking through a dam. She couldn't name what they meant, couldn't translate the movements into words, but understanding bloomed behind each gesture, not in her mind but deeper, in the marrow of her bones, in the instinct that lived beneath language. Her fingers traced patterns in the air that felt ancient and absolute. And with each movement she felt something awakening inside her, unfurling like wings that had been bound too long. Cole watched without interrupting, his amber eyes tracking every gesture with an intensity that would have made her self-conscious if she'd been fully present in her human mind. But she wasn't. She existed in that liminal space between woman and wolf, where both natures merged into something that transcended either. In this state the world looked different. Harper. Every scent carried information, every sound held meaning, and the movements of her hands felt less like communication and more like command written directly into reality. When her hands finally stilled, Nora swayed slightly, exhaustion washing through her like a tide. Cole moved instantly, his hand catching her elbow before she could fall. The touch grounded her, pulling her back into her human skin, and she gasped as awareness returned in a rush that left her dizzy. Easy, Cole murmured, his grip firm but gentle. The first time always takes the most out of you. Your body isn't used to channeling that kind of power. What? Nora's voice came out hoarse. She cleared her throat, tried again. What did I just say? Whatever. Cole's expression had gone strange, somewhere between awe and something darker, more troubled. He released her arm and stepped back, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that seemed unconscious, almost human rather than kingly. You signed a battle sequence, he said slowly. The kind the first alphas used to coordinate hunting parties across vast distances. Formation patterns, timing signals, fallback positions. An entire strategic language that should have died 3 centuries ago. Nora stared at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. They looked ordinary again, the tingling sensation faded, no sign of the power that had flowed through them moments before. I don't understand. How do I know these things? I've never been in a battle. I've never even seen combat. Because you're not just remembering, Cole said. He gestured for her to follow him to a shaded area near the courtyard wall where a stone bench offered respite from the climbing sun. They sat, and he pulled a water skin from his belt, offering it to her first before taking a drink himself. The casual gesture felt strangely intimate, as if they were companions rather than king and subject. What your grandfather did, this imprinting, it's not like teaching someone to memorize information. It's writing knowledge directly into the body's memory, into the very structure of your instincts. You know these battle signals the way you know how to breathe or how to shift. It's not conscious knowledge. It's cellular. Nora drank deeply, the cool water soothing her raw throat. But why? Why would my grandfather do this to me? What was he preparing me for? That's the question I've been asking myself since last night. Cole's gaze drifted across the training yard where guards had resumed their sparring, though she noticed they kept stealing glances toward where she and Cole sat. The first alphas had many roles, many titles, but the most important, the one that allowed them to rule as effectively as they did, was the Lunar Oracle. The title resonated through Nora like a struck bell, sending ripples of recognition through her chest. Her wolf stirred at the words, responding to something Nora's conscious mind couldn't grasp. Cole noticed her reaction. You feel it, don't you? The resonance. That's your blood recognizing what it is, what you're meant to be. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice dropping to something almost reverent. The Lunar Oracle wasn't just a sign language interpreter, Nora. They were the keeper of the pack's battle memory. The living repository of every tactical formation, every hunting strategy, every defensive maneuver that had proven successful over generations. When the first alphas went to war, the Oracle stood at the center and conducted the pack like a symphony, coordinating hundreds of wolves through pure instinct and gesture. That's impossible, Nora whispered. No one person could hold that much information, could control that many wolves at once. No ordinary person could, Cole agreed. But an oracle wasn't ordinary. They were chosen by blood, trained from childhood, and imprinted with centuries of accumulated tactical knowledge. Their hands didn't just communicate, they commanded. When an oracle signed attack, wolves attacked without question or hesitation because the command bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to primal instinct. He turned to look at her fully, and in his eyes she saw both hope and something like apology. Your grandfather didn't just give you a language, Nora. He made you a weapon. The most effective tactical weapon a pack can possess. The words settled over her like stones, heavy and inescapable. Nora looked down at her hands again, flexing her fingers slowly. A weapon can be destroyed when it's no longer useful, or protected when it becomes essential, Cole countered. I won't lie to you. What you are makes you valuable, and valuable things are always in danger. But it also makes you necessary, indispensable. No one can afford to destroy you when you might be the difference between victory and extinction. Except your mother. The observation came out flat, tired. Cole's jaw tightened. My mother remembers the first alpha's reign. She was young, barely more than a child, but she remembers how absolute their power was. How resistance was impossible when an oracle commanded the pack. She sees you as a return to that kind of control, that kind of tyranny. He paused, seeming to weigh his words. Grace has spent her entire life ensuring that no single wolf, not even me, has too much power. She believes in balance, in councils and checks and careful political maneuvering. You represent everything she's fought against. Then maybe she's right to fear me. Maybe, Cole acknowledged. Or maybe she's wrong to assume you'd use your power the way the first alphas did. You're not them, Nora. You didn't grow up in that era. Didn't learn their philosophy of absolute rule. You were raised as an omega, taught humility and service. That might make you exactly what we need. An oracle who understands restraint. Nora laughed, the sound bitter. You're assuming I have any control over this at all. What if I sign something in panic and accidentally command the entire pack to attack? What if I can't control it? Then we train, Cole said simply. Starting now. Every day until you understand not just what you can do, but how to direct it, how to hold it back when necessary. He stood, offering her his hand. The private training ground behind the royal quarters. No guards, no observers. Just you and me figuring out the limits of what you are. Nora took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. His grip was warm, calloused from weapons training, and she noticed he held on a moment longer than necessary before releasing her. And if we can't figure it out, if I'm too dangerous to control, then we deal with that when we come to it, Cole said, but his eyes held a promise she couldn't quite read. But I don't believe you're dangerous, Nora. Powerful, yes. Potentially devastating in the wrong hands or with the wrong intentions. But dangerous. He shook his head. Danger requires malice or recklessness. You have neither. They walked together through the castle corridors, Cole leading her through passages she'd never traversed as a servant. These were the private ways, the routes meant for royalty and their most trusted advisors. Guards bowed as they passed but kept their distance, and Nora noticed how Cole positioned himself slightly ahead of her, a subtle but clear signal to anyone watching that she was under his protection. The private training ground turned out to be a walled garden, lush and green, with flowering vines climbing the stone walls and a small fountain burbling in the center. It was beautiful, peaceful, completely unlike the harsh functionality of the main training yard. Cole led her to a clear space beneath an ancient oak tree, its branches spreading wide enough to provide shade for a dozen wolves. "This was my mother's garden," Cole said, noting her surprised expression. "Before she decided I needed a more practical space for weapons training. But I kept it maintained because sometimes the best training happens in beauty rather than brutality." He turned to face her, and something in his demeanor had shifted, become less formal, more open. "What I'm about to teach you isn't in any book, isn't recorded in the archives. It's instinct, pure and simple. The way to access your power without losing yourself to it." Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. "How do you know how to teach this? The first language died centuries before you were born." "Because my grandmother was the last person to witness an oracle in action before they were all executed," Cole said quietly. "She was 5 years old when the revolution came, and she watched an oracle named Astrid coordinate the final defense of the first Alpha stronghold. My grandmother told me stories that she made me swear never to repeat. Stories about what she saw, how Astrid moved, how the pack responded." His expression grew distant, as if seeing through time to that ancient moment. "She said it looked like a dance. Like every wolf was connected by invisible threads and Astrid was weaving a tapestry of violence and grace. She said it was the most beautiful and terrible thing she'd ever witnessed. And she told you how it worked. She told me what she observed, yes. How Astrid centered herself first, found stillness even in chaos. How she breathed in rhythm with the pack's movement. How her gestures were economical, precise, never wasted." Cole's hands rose, mimicking movements that looked both graceful and deadly. "She said the secret was in the oracle's connection to their own wolf. Not dominance, not suppression, but perfect union. Human wisdom guiding wolf instinct fueling human intention." Nora felt that stirring in her chest again. Her wolf responding to Cole's words with eagerness that surprised her. "I don't know if I can do that. My wolf has always been so small, so quiet." Small doesn't mean weak, Cole said. He stepped closer, and suddenly his hand was against her sternum, pressing gently over her heart. And quiet doesn't mean powerless. Feel her now. She's not hiding anymore, is she? He was right. Nora's wolf pressed against her ribs like she was trying to break free, but it wasn't the painful struggle of forced shifting. It was anticipation, recognition, as if her wolf had been waiting for this exact moment, for someone to finally see her not as a liability to be hidden but as an essential part of something larger. Close your eyes, Cole commanded softly. Find that place you accessed earlier, that space between human and wolf. But this time go deeper. Let your wolf rise until you can see through her eyes while keeping your human mind aware. 2 consciousnesses, 1 body. Nora obeyed, though fear threaded through her compliance. She'd spent so long keeping her wolf suppressed that deliberately calling her forward felt like inviting chaos. But she breathed deep, pushed past the fear, and reached for that wild part of herself she'd been taught to deny. Her wolf surged forward with a joy that stole Nora's breath. And suddenly she could feel everything. The texture of the earth beneath her boots, the whisper of wind through the oak leaves, the steady rhythm of Cole's heartbeat mere feet away. Her senses sharpened until she could smell the weapon oil on his clothes, could hear the distant conversations in the castle, could taste the coming rain on the air. Good. Cole's voice came as if from a great distance. Now, without opening your eyes, without thinking, let your hands move. Show me the sign for home. Not the concept, not the word. Show me what home feels like in your blood. Nora's hands rose without conscious direction, fingers weaving patterns that felt like safety and belonging and the fierce love of pack. The movements were gentle but absolute, tender but commanding, and as they flowed from her fingertips she felt something shift inside her chest, clicking into place like a key turning in a lock that had been sealed her entire life. When she opened her eyes, Cole was staring at her with an expression of wonder that made him look younger, more vulnerable than she'd yet seen him. That, he breathed, was perfect. That was an oracle speaking. And in that moment, standing in Grace's stolen garden with the Alpha King watching her like she'd just performed a miracle, Nora finally understood what her grandfather had made her. Not a weapon, not exactly. Not a tool to be wielded or a threat to be eliminated. Keeper. Bridge. The living memory of what wolves could become when they remembered they were more than teeth and territory, when they remembered they were pack, connected by something deeper than hierarchy or power. She was the last oracle, imprinted with knowledge that should have died, carrying power that terrified even those who needed it most. And despite everything, the danger, the fear, the impossible weight of it all, some part of her soul recognized this truth with a certainty that felt like coming home. The attack came 3 nights later, during the moon ceremony when the pack gathered in the grand hall to celebrate the full moon's ascension. Nora had been standing near the eastern windows, watching moonlight paint silver across the assembled wolves, when the first scream tore through the celebration. Glass shattered in a crystalline cascade as shadow stalkers poured through the windows like a plague of teeth and fury. They came in wolf form, massive gray beasts with eyes that gleamed red in the candlelight, and they came with the precision of warriors who had planned this assault down to the heartbeat. The pack scattered in chaos, nobles and servants alike stumbling over each other in their panic to escape or shift or fight. Nora's first instinct was to run, to disappear into the walls like she'd always done when danger came. But then she saw Cole at the far end of the hall, already shifted partially, his eyes blazing amber as he roared commands that were lost in the screaming. She saw his warriors trying to form defensive positions but colliding with fleeing civilians, saw the shadow stalkers exploiting every moment of confusion to drag down another wolf, another victim. They were losing because they were fighting as individuals rather than as pack. Something shifted inside Nora's chest, clicking into place with the same certainty she'd felt in the garden. Her wolf surged forward without fear, without hesitation, and suddenly Nora existed in that liminal space between human and beast, seeing the battle with predatory clarity. She could read the flow of combat like it was written in her blood, the shadow stalkers' formation, their tactical approach, the weakness in their eastern flank that no one else seemed to notice. Her hands rose without conscious thought. The first sign cut through the chaos like a blade through silk, defend, hold position. The gesture was sharp, absolute, commanding in a way that bypassed sound and confusion and spoke directly to wolf instinct. Every Silver Moon warrior in the hall froze mid-motion, their heads snapping toward her as if she'd called their names. The sign didn't ask for obedience. It demanded it, wrote the command directly into their bones. Nora's hands moved again, faster now, weaving the battle formations her body remembered even if her mind didn't understand. Northern warriors, take the eastern flank. Southern group, reinforce the civilians' retreat. Center guard with your alpha. Each gesture rippled through the pack like electricity through water, and wolves moved instantly, precisely, abandoning individual panic for coordinated purpose. Cole's eyes found hers across the battle-torn hall, and in them she saw shock transform into understanding and then into something fierce and approving. He shifted fully, a massive black wolf with amber eyes that blazed like fire, and howled a command that harmonized with Nora's silent signals. The pack responded as one entity, moving with the deadly grace of wolves who remembered what it meant to hunt as a unified force. The Shadowstalkers faltered, confusion rippling through their ranks as their carefully planned assault met organized resistance instead of chaos. Nora could see their leader, a scarred gray beast larger than the others, trying to rally his warriors, but they were already on the defensive, caught off guard by the Silver Moon pack's sudden coordination. Nora's hands carved new shapes in the air. Pincer formation, drive them toward the western doors. The warriors obeyed without hesitation, flowing around the Shadowstalkers like water around stone, cutting off escape routes and forcing them into an ever-tightening circle. She signed again, no killing, capture where possible, and watched as warriors who moments ago had been lost in bloodlust suddenly fought with restraint, with purpose beyond simple violence. The scarred leader saw the trap closing and made a desperate lunge toward the civilians still huddling near the northern wall. But Nora had already anticipated the move, had signed the counterformation seconds before he committed. 3 warriors intercepted him mid-leap, bearing him down with coordinated precision that left him pinned but alive. The battle lasted 7 minutes from first scream to final surrender, and when it ended, 12 Shadowstalkers lay captured and bound while only 3 Silver Moon wolves had sustained serious injuries. It should have been a massacre given the surprise and tactical advantage the attackers had possessed. Instead, it was a decisive victory that left the surviving Shadowstalkers staring at Nora with expressions that mixed fear and disbelief. The hall fell silent except for heavy breathing and the whimpers of wounded. Nora's hands finally stilled, dropping to her sides as exhaustion crashed through her like a physical blow. Her wolf retreated slowly, reluctantly, and the returning distance between human and beast left Nora swaying where she stood. Cole shifted back to human form, uncaring of his nakedness as alphas often were, and crossed the ruined hall in long strides. He stopped directly in front of Nora, his eyes blazing with emotions too complex to name. That, he said, his voice rough from the shift, was what an oracle looks like in battle. Around them, the pack began to understand what they'd witnessed. Wolves shifted back to human form, staring at Nora with expressions that ranged from awe to something approaching worship. She'd done what should have been impossible, coordinated dozens of warriors through pure gesture in the midst of chaos, turning certain defeat into overwhelming victory. Grace stood near the high table, her silver hair disheveled, her face white but her eyes sharp and assessing. She signed something slowly, deliberately, and though most of the pack couldn't read the formal language, Nora understood with perfect clarity. I underestimated you. Nora's response came without thought, her hands moving in the ancient tongue that had shocked the court days ago. But this time the signs weren't defensive or reactive. They were a promise, an oath, a declaration of purpose. I am Keeper. I am Oracle. I am this pack's protector whether you accept me or not. The silence that followed felt sacred, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Then Cole did something that sent ripples of shock through every watching wolf. He dropped to one knee before Nora, his head bowed in a gesture of respect that no Alpha King had shown to anyone in living memory. My Oracle, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. My bridge. My pack's salvation. One by one, the warriors followed their king's example, dropping to their knees in acknowledgement of what Nora had become. Even Grace, after a long moment of visible internal struggle, inclined her head in grudging acceptance. The invisible Omega who had polished goblets and faded into walls was gone, replaced by something the pack hadn't seen in 3 centuries. A living weapon of coordination and command, a keeper of ancient power, a protector who could turn chaos into deadly precision with nothing but the movement of her hands. Nora looked down at her trembling fingers, at the hands that had just saved countless lives and secured her place in history she'd never wanted. She thought of her grandfather, of the careful way he'd hidden this knowledge inside her, preparing her for a moment neither of them could have predicted. Had he known? Had he seen this future? The attack, the need, the awakening. The oracle didn't have answers, only the certainty that she could never go back to being invisible. The fault line beneath her life had finally broken open, and what rose from the depths was power too essential to deny, too necessary to destroy, too dangerous to ignore. She was Nora Connor, last of the lunar oracles, keeper of the first language, bridge between ancient power and modern pack. And as the moon blazed silver through the shattered windows, she finally understood what her grandfather had spent his exile protecting. Not a weapon, not a tool, but the fragile hope that when the pack needed her most, she would remember what wolves could become when they moved as one perfect savage symphony. Thank you for joining the pack today. If this story pulled you in, make sure to subscribe and tap the moon bell so you never miss the next Alpha Destiny. And tell me in the comments, who should we follow next under the full moon?